Mr. Han arrived in Gimhae on a Tuesday. The early winter chill had already begun to settle over the small city, coaxing a brittle frost onto the fallen ginkgo leaves that carpeted the quieter alleyways. He was a man of medium height, with a neatness about him that was almost unnerving. His dark suit was impeccably cut, his shoes polished to a discreet gleam, and his black hair was styled with a precision that suggested not a hint of vanity, but rather a profound attention to detail. His face was pleasant, unremarkable at first glance, yet possessed a calm that drew the eye. There was a stillness in his dark gaze, an unreadable quality that hinted at depths unseen and experiences unspoken, making him an immediate subject of quiet contemplation for those he met. Gimhae itself was stirring into its weekday rhythm, a gentle hum of activity that rarely escalated into a roar. It was a city proud of its history, nestled beside the Nakdong River, a place where ancient tombs shared the landscape with modern apartment blocks and bustling markets. The Prime Future Academy, a hagwon catering to ambitious middle and high school students, was situated on a relatively busy street. Yet it felt a world away from the frantic pace of Seoul. News of a new English teacher, particularly one with such a glowing, if somewhat vague reference from a prestigious Seoul institution, had created a small ripple of anticipation among the staff. They expected someone experienced, perhaps a little world-weary. They did not quite expect Mr. Han, who seemed to carry his own distinct atmosphere with him. He arrived not in a flashy car, but in a standard orange city taxi. The taxi pulled up, and Mr. Han alighted with an easy grace, paying the fare with crisp bills. Director Park Yun-kyung, a woman whose enthusiasm often outpaced her discretion, was practically vibrating by the entrance. She had imagined all sorts of distinguished arrivals, but this quiet emergence was somehow more impactful. He carried a single, well-made leather briefcase and nothing more. No fuss, no entourage. He simply was. Director Park rushed forward, her smile wide, her welcome effusive, a flurry of polite bows and excited greetings that Mr. Han returned with a calm, measured politeness that subtly controlled the exchange, making her feel both welcomed and slightly managed. Mr. Han, welcome. Welcome to Prime Future Academy. We are so honored to have you. Director Park's voice was a little breathless. Mr. Han offered a slight inclination of his head, a smile that was perfectly formed but did not quite banish the shadows from his eyes. Thank you, Director Park. It is my pleasure to be here, he replied, his voice a smooth baritone, each syllable enunciated with perfect clarity. It was a voice that could soothe or perhaps command with equal ease. As he stepped inside the hagwon, a faint, almost undetectable scent of something clean and faintly metallic, like cold steel or winter air, seemed to follow him, a subtle signature of his presence, leaving an unspoken question hanging in the air about the life he had left behind. Director Park proudly showed Mr. Han to his designated workspace. It was a modest desk in a shared office, tucked away in a corner, offering a degree of privacy. The previous occupant had left behind a cheerful clutter of novelty pens and motivational posters. Mr. Han surveyed it with an impassive expression. Within minutes he had cleared the surface, wiping it down with a handkerchief produced from his pocket. He then placed his only visible personal effects, a plain dark fountain pen, a small unmarked notebook, and a slim volume of English poetry. His efficiency was remarkable, transforming the small space into an austere, almost monastic cell of concentration, a stark contrast to the vibrant chaos typical of a busy learning academy. His first encounters with the students were, by all accounts, a resounding success. Teenagers, usually a mixture of sullen indifference and boisterous energy, found themselves strangely captivated. He had a way of explaining the tortuous complexities of English grammar that made them seem logical, even intriguing. His patience appeared limitless. When he smiled at a student's correct answer, the smile was encouraging, yet it never quite seemed to reach the depths of his eyes, those dark pools that observed everything with an unnerving acuity. He moved with a quiet confidence, his presence filling the classroom without overwhelming it. An island of calm in the often turbulent sea of adolescent learning, yet some sensitive students felt a faint chill they couldn't quite name. Director Park could barely contain her delight. A genius, an absolute find, she declared to anyone who would listen, her voice brimming with triumph. She saw Mr. Han as the key to elevating Prime Future Academy's reputation, a star teacher who would draw in more students and more tuition fees. The other teachers, a mix of younger, eager educators and more seasoned veterans, watched him with a combination of professional admiration and a subtle, unvoiced disquiet. He was too perfect, perhaps, too controlled. His politeness was a flawless shield, deflecting any casual inquiry into his past with an effortless, almost invisible skill. They knew his name, his subject, and the fact he came highly recommended, but the man himself remained an enigma. There were fleeting moments, however, when the mask seemed to slip almost imperceptibly. Once, standing alone by the staff room window, gazing out at the grey Gimhae sky as dusk began to settle, a different expression shadowed his face. It was not sadness precisely, nor anger. It was something colder, more desolate, a fleeting glimpse of a winter landscape within. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, replaced by his usual calm composure as a colleague approached. He turned, offered his polite, distant smile, and the moment was lost, leaving only a faint residue of unease in the observer, a silent question about the burdens such a man might carry beneath his polished exterior. Inspector Kang Min-jun of the Gimhae Seobu police station often felt like a relic himself. Much like the ancient tombs that dotted his jurisdiction, his small, cluttered office was a testament to years of long hours and solved and unsolved cases. Piles of files threatened to avalanche onto the floor, mingling with the aroma of stale instant coffee and cheap noodles. His computer monitor, an aging model, flickered erratically. Inspector Kang sighed often. He preferred the simple things. A warm bowl of soup, the predictable comfort of his small apartment, the quiet satisfaction of a crossword puzzle completed. He was a man who craved order, a stark contrast to the chaos he so often confronted in his professional life. He was in his late 50s, with eyes that had seen too much and a weariness that seemed to settle in his very bones. His shoulders were slightly stooped, not from age alone, but from the cumulative weight of other people's tragedies. His hair, once dark, was now generously streaked with grey. He wasn't a brilliant, intuitive detective of the kind celebrated in films. Rather, he was a plodder, methodical and thorough, a man who trusted facts and procedure above all else. His tenacity had cracked many a difficult case, earning him a grudging respect within the force, though he sought no accolades, only the quiet end of each difficult day. His partner, Inspector Kim Young-soo, was a different breed entirely. Younger by a good 15 years, Kim still possessed an eager energy that Kang sometimes found exhausting but often secretly appreciated. Kim was quicker with technology, more attuned to the nuances of social media, and generally more optimistic about the inherent goodness of humanity, despite their shared profession. Where Kang was deliberate, Kim was often impulsive, though he had learned to temper his enthusiasm under Kang's steadying influence. A genuine, if unspoken, affection and respect existed between the two men, forged in the crucible of shared dangers and long, fruitless stakeouts. They were an odd pair, but an effective one. On that particular chilly morning, Inspector Kang was sifting through a stack of cold case files. The ink faded, the faces in the photographs hauntingly distant. A string of minor burglaries, a dispute between neighbors that had turned briefly violent, the usual fare for a city like Gimhae. He let out a quiet sigh, the sound barely audible above the hum of the fluorescent lights. Retirement was a shimmering mirage on the horizon, a peaceful haven he increasingly yearned for. Yet the familiar weight of his badge, the ingrained sense of duty, kept him anchored to this desk, to this life of peering into the darker corners of human nature, waiting for the next call, the next disruption to his carefully constructed peace. The shrill, insistent ring of the landline telephone sliced through the relative quiet of the detective's office. It was a sound Kang had come to associate with trouble, a harbinger of disruption to his carefully ordered day. He reached for the receiver with a practiced slowness, his expression unchanging. "Inspector Kang," he announced, his voice a low rumble, gravelly, from years of disuse in the early mornings and overuse during interrogations. He listened, his gaze fixed on a crack in the plaster of the opposite wall, his mind already sifting through possibilities, bracing for the inevitable descent into someone else's misfortune. He did not like surprises, and the telephone, in his line of work, rarely brought good news. The voice on the other end was young, a uniformed officer, audibly nervous. "Sir, we have a situation. A body has been found." Kang's posture straightened ever so slightly. "Male or female?" "Location?" he asked, his tone devoid of emotion, purely functional. The officer continued. "Male, sir." "And the location?" It's near the royal tomb of King Suro by the main path leading up to the mound. Kang's eyebrows, thick and grey, furrowed slightly. King Suro's tomb, a landmark, a place of national heritage. Not the usual dark alley or deserted riverbank. This detail, small as it was, sent a faint ripple of unease through him, a premonition that this would not be a straightforward affair. "Understood. Secure the scene. No one touches anything until we arrive," Kang instructed, his voice firm, cutting through the officer's residual nervousness. He replaced the receiver with a decisive click. "Kim," he called out, his voice carrying across the small office space. "Get the car, we have a call." Inspector Kim, who had been engrossed in an online news article, looked up, his youthful face immediately alert. The familiar spark of adrenaline, the hunter's instinct, flickered in his eyes, an energy Kang himself had long since learned to temper with a heavy dose of cynicism. Another day, another life extinguished, another puzzle to piece together from the scattered fragments of tragedy. As they prepared to leave, Inspector Kang paused for a moment, looking out the grimy window at the grey Gimhae sky. The royal tomb of King Suro, a place of solemn history, of ancient kings and dynastic power, a site visited by tourists and schoolchildren, a symbol of Gimhae's deep roots. It was an incongruous setting for death, particularly a suspicious one. The early winter air, which had seemed merely crisp before, now felt laden with a deeper, more penetrating cold. He had a feeling, a familiar prickling at the back of his neck, that this case would demand more than just his usual methodical approach. This felt different, somehow more significant. The drive to the royal tomb of King Suro was short, but the atmosphere grew heavier with each passing kilometre. As they neared the site, the usual smattering of early morning joggers and elderly walkers was absent, replaced by the stark blue and white of police vehicles and the sombre figures of uniformed officers. A biting wind swept across the open grounds surrounding the tomb, whipping at their coats and carrying the faint scent of pine needles and damp earth. The sky overhead was a uniform, unforgiving grey. The officers already on scene looked tense, their breath forming small, anxious clouds in the frigid air, their hushed conversation ceasing as Kang and Kim approached. The great burial mound of King Suro, the legendary founder of the Gaia Confederacy, loomed before them, a silent, imposing presence. It was a place usually associated with reverence, with school trips learning about ancient history, with families enjoying a peaceful stroll. Now it was cordoned off with bright yellow police tape, a stark modern intrusion upon the ancient landscape. The air itself felt charged, a strange mixture of sacred stillness and the grim reality of violent death. Kang felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle upon him, the need to bring order to this disruption, to find answers in the shadow of such profound history. Inspector Kang, followed closely by Kim, was led by a junior officer past the initial perimeter. Their footsteps crunched on the gravel path, the sound unnaturally loud in the otherwise quiet surroundings. The first responders, a paramedic team and a couple of patrolmen, stood a little way off, their expressions grim, their voices low and respectful as they conferred. Kang noted their unease. It was more than the usual tension at a crime scene. There was an almost superstitious reluctance in their demeanor, as if the sanctity of the place itself had been violated in a particularly egregious way. The ground beneath their feet felt cold, unyielding, as if the earth itself was recoiling from the event. They approached the specific area, a secluded spot just off the main pathway, partially obscured by a cluster of meticulously maintained ornamental shrubs. A dark green tarpaulin lay over something on the ground, its shape suggestive and grim. The air here seemed even colder, heavier, thick with unspoken questions and a palpable sense of profound wrongness. Inspector Kang paused for a moment, his gaze sweeping the surroundings, taking in the ancient trees, the carefully raked ground, the imposing silhouette of the tomb against the bleak sky. He was preparing himself, steeling his senses for what lay beneath the covering, for the story the silent earth was about to tell. With a nod from Inspector Kang, one of the junior officers carefully, almost reverently, lifted the corner of the tarpaulin. The sight revealed was both mundane and deeply unsettling. A man lay there, his eyes closed, his expression serene. He was dressed in an expensive dark grey business suit, a crisp white shirt, and a subtly patterned silk tie, knotted perfectly. He could have been a businessman resting after a long meeting, were it not for the unnatural stillness and the cold, hard ground beneath him. He looked utterly out of place, a figure from a boardroom drama inexplicably transported to this ancient sacred soil. His composure a stark contrast to the implied violence of his situation. The staging of the body was what immediately struck Kang as peculiar. The man was not sprawled haphazardly, as is common in sudden death or a violent struggle. Instead, he was arranged with an almost artistic precision. His hands were folded neatly on his chest, his legs were straight, his head resting as if on an invisible pillow. It looked less like the aftermath of a crime and more like a carefully constructed tableau, a deliberate pose designed for an unseen audience. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, no torn clothing, no visible pools of blood staining the pristine suit or the frosted grass around him. It was eerily clean. Inspector Kang crouched down, his old knees protesting with a familiar ache. He ignored the discomfort, his focus absolute. He began his visual examination, his eyes accustomed to deciphering the grim narratives of death, missing no detail. The man's fingernails were clean, manicured, his shoes, expensive Italian leather, were unscuffed, suggesting he had not walked far or struggled on this ground. Inspector Kim stood beside him, his notebook open, his pen scratching silently, his youthful face unusually somber. The usual banter between them was absent, replaced by a shared understanding of the gravity and the strangeness of the scene before them. The cold air seemed to hum with unanswered questions. As Kang's gloved hand gently patted the lapel of the man's suit jacket, checking for anything out of the ordinary, his fingers brushed against something small and slightly raised. He peered closer. Adhering to the fine wool was a tiny iridescent object no bigger than a sequin. It shimmered faintly, catching the weak, diffuse light of the overcast morning. It was a scale almost like that of a fish, yet its texture and the quality of its luster seemed subtly different, more jewel-like, perhaps. Kang carefully detached it, his brow furrowed in thought. It was an incongruous detail, a tiny, glittering anomaly in this carefully arranged scene of death. He had a feeling this small, shimmering scale might be very important. "There's no visible blood, sir," Inspector Kim murmured, his voice low as he scanned the immediate vicinity. "No obvious weapon anywhere nearby either. The ground doesn't look disturbed beyond where he's lying. It's remarkably tidy." He looked at Kang, a question in his eyes. "It's too clean for a typical homicide, isn't it? Usually there's some mess, some sign of a struggle, something." Kim gestured vaguely at the composed figure. "He looks almost peaceful, except he's dead. And here, at the king's tomb." The juxtaposition was clearly unsettling for the younger detective, challenging his more conventional understanding of criminal behavior. Inspector Kang straightened up slowly, the tiny, shimmering scale now safely enclosed in an evidence bag held carefully in his gloved hand. He let out a long, slow breath, the mist of it dissipating quickly in the frigid air. "This wasn't a fight, Kim," he stated, his voice firm, though quiet. "This wasn't a robbery gone wrong or a sudden, passionate outburst. This was something else entirely." He rubbed his tired chin, his gaze sweeping over the body once more, then to the imposing tomb mound in the distance. This was a placement, a deliberate arrangement, a statement, perhaps. The word hung in the cold air, heavy with implication, like a performance. Kim ventured, picking up on Kang's line of thought. "As if this whole place, the tomb, the setting, it's all part of a stage. And he," Kim gestured towards the deceased, "is the main actor. Only his role was to be found like this." The idea, once voiced, seemed to fit the unsettling tableau perfectly. The meticulous arrangement of the body, the lack of any visible violence, the choice of such a significant public yet strangely intimate location, it all pointed towards a mind that was not merely intent on killing, but on conveying a message, on creating an impact beyond the mere fact of death itself. Kang gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. The theatricality was undeniable and deeply disturbing. A shiver, one that had little to do with the biting wind, traced its way down Inspector Kang's spine. This case felt profoundly different from the sordid, desperate crimes he usually investigated. This had a chilling intelligence behind it, a meticulous planning that spoke of a cold, calculating mind. This was not the work of a common thug or a desperate soul pushed to the brink. This felt like an overture, he sensed with a growing dread, the carefully orchestrated opening act of something far more elaborate, far more unsettling, and perhaps far more dangerous. And then, unbidden, a fleeting image surfaced in his weary mind. The new teacher, Mr. Han, with his impeccable calm and his unreadable eyes. A man who had just arrived, bringing with him his own quiet enigma. The connection was tenuous, a mere whisper of intuition, yet it lingered.